Have you ever found yourself in a debate, listening to someone argue a point with such breathtaking, unshakable confidence, only to realize that every single thing they're saying is demonstrably, utterly wrong? Have you scrolled through comments online and witnessed a person with no expertise declare themselves an authority, dismissing decades of scientific consensus with a link to a 5-minute video they just watched? We've all seen it. We've all shaken our heads at that person, the one so insulated by their own certainty that reason cannot penetrate their fortress of conviction. But now, let me ask you a more uncomfortable question. A question that might send a quiet chill down your spine. Have you ever considered, just for a moment, that you might be that person to someone else? What if, in some area of your life, you are the one who is so confidently wrong? What if there is a blind spot in your own mind? A place where your ignorance feels exactly like expertise? This isn't just a philosophical puzzle. It is one of the most well-documented and dangerous glitches in the human psyche. It is a paradox that governs our lives more than we could ever imagine. The strange, counterintuitive reality that often, the less you know, the more you think you know. The skills you need to produce a right answer are often the very same skills you need to recognize what a right answer is. And if you lack that knowledge, you are not just incompetent, you are blissfully unaware of your own incompetence. This isn't a theory about other people. This is a warning about all of us. Because before you can spot the fool in the world, you must first be willing to confront the possibility of the fool within. The story that perfectly captures this idea begins with a man named MacArthur Wheeler. In 1995, Wheeler decided to rob 2 banks in Pittsburgh in broad daylight. He didn't wear a ski mask. He didn't wear a disguise. Instead, he covered his face in lemon juice. He did this because he believed, with absolute conviction, that lemon juice, being a key ingredient in invisible ink, would make his face invisible to the security cameras. He was, of course, wrong. The security camera footage was perfectly clear, and later that day the police knocked on his door. When they showed him the surveillance tapes, Wheeler stared in disbelief. "But I wore the juice," he muttered, utterly baffled that his foolproof plan had failed. Wheeler wasn't insane, nor was he unintelligent in the conventional sense. His problem was something far more common. His very incompetence had robbed him of the ability to recognize his own incompetence. This bizarre case caught the attention of 2 social psychologists at Cornell University, David Dunning and Dunning-Kruger. They wondered, could it be that for a given skill, incompetent people don't just perform poorly, but they are also unable to see that they are performing poorly? This led to their groundbreaking 1999 study. They tested students on subjects like grammar, logic, and humor. And after the test, they asked each student to estimate how well they thought they did. The results were astonishing and have been replicated time and time again. The students who performed the worst, those in the bottom quartile, didn't just fail to recognize their lack of skill, they dramatically overestimated their own abilities. They believed they had performed well above average. They were not just in the dark. They were in the dark and believed they were standing in the light. This is what became known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. It is a cognitive bias where people with low ability at a task overestimate their ability. But the discovery came with a double-edged reality. Dunning and Kruger found that this incompetence carries a double curse. First, it leads you to make mistakes and poor decisions. But second, the very same incompetence prevents you from being able to see your mistakes. The knowledge required to be good at something, let's say grammar, is the very same knowledge required to recognize your own grammatical errors and to recognize expertise in others. If you don't have it, you can't do either. You float on in a bubble of imagined competence. Conversely, the study found that the top performers, the true experts, often did the opposite. They tended to underestimate their own competence. They assumed that because a task was easy for them, it must be easy for everyone else, a phenomenon often linked to imposter syndrome. The Dunning-Kruger effect, therefore, isn't about being stupid. It's about a blind spot that comes with a little bit of knowledge. It's the story of how our minds can build a prison of confidence out of the bricks of our own ignorance. So why does this happen? Why are we as human beings so susceptible to this profound self-delusion? It is tempting to dismiss it as arrogance or ego, But the roots run much deeper, into the very wiring of our brains and the fundamental nature of the human psyche. It's not a moral failing. It's a feature of how our minds work. Our brain is not a machine built for absolute truth. It is a machine built for survival. And survival often depends on maintaining a stable sense of self. When we encounter information that suggests we are unskilled or incompetent, it feels like a direct attack on our identity. The ego, that part of us that constructs our sense of who we are, will do almost anything to protect itself from the discomfort of feeling inadequate. Admitting, "I don't know," or "I am not good at this," is a painful act. It requires vulnerability and humility. It is much easier, much more comfortable, for the brain to create a narrative of competence, even if it's a complete illusion. This is the path of least resistance, what psychologists call cognitive ease. Our brains are wired to prefer simple, certain conclusions over complex, uncertain truths, because it requires less mental energy. Believing you are a great driver is far simpler than confronting the 100 subtle skills you have yet to master. This is where a small amount of knowledge becomes a truly dangerous thing. Imagine the journey of learning any new skill. When you know absolutely nothing, you are typically aware of your ignorance. But then you learn a little. You watch a few videos, read a few articles, and suddenly you feel a surge of confidence. You've reached what is famously known as the peak of Mount Stupid. At this point, you've learned just enough to feel like you understand the subject, but you haven't learned enough to realize the sheer vastness of what you don't know. Your confidence has massively outpaced your competence. You don't know what you don't know. Only by pushing forward, by continuing to learn, do you begin the painful descent into what's called the Valley of Despair. This is where you start to realize the true complexity of the subject. You discover all the nuance, all the exceptions to the rules, all the things you never even considered. Your confidence plummets because you are finally gaining enough knowledge to recognize the true extent of your own ignorance. It is only after persevering through this valley that you can begin the slow, arduous climb up the slope of enlightenment, where your confidence and competence begin to grow together, grounded in genuine understanding. The tragedy is that many people get to the top of Mount Stupid, plant their flag, and live there for the rest of their lives, mistaking that small hill for the entire mountain range of knowledge. This isn't just an individual problem. We are living in a world that seems custom-built to keep us all camped out on Mount Stupid. Our modern society, especially our digital world, has become a vast, echoing breeding ground for the Dunning-Kruger effect. Think about social media. The algorithms that govern our feeds are not designed to reward truth, nuance, or intellectual humility. They are designed to maximize engagement. And what creates engagement? Confidence. Outrage. Simple, emotionally charged statements that can be digested in seconds. A complex, well-reasoned argument filled with nuance and uncertainty struggles to go viral. But a confident, simplistic, and often misleading statement can spread like wildfire. In this environment, everyone is encouraged to have a strong opinion on everything, from epidemiology to foreign policy, often based on a handful of headlines or a viral video. The platform rewards the performance of expertise over the reality of it. We are all being trained to become confident broadcasters of information we barely understand, creating echo chambers where our own ill-informed beliefs are reflected back at us, making us even more certain. This dynamic has poisoned our public discourse. In politics, we see how leaders who project absolute certainty, who offer simple slogans for complex problems, often gain more traction than those who admit to the difficulties and uncertainties inherent in governing. They tell people what they want to hear with unshakable confidence, and in a confusing world, that confidence feels reassuring. We mistake the certainty of the speaker for the certainty of the facts. We elect people who are masters of sounding right, not necessarily masters of being right. This extends into our workplaces. Someone who is incompetent in their role may not only fail to recognize their own shortcomings, but also fail to recognize the genuine expertise of their colleagues. They might dismiss valuable insights from more skilled team members, believing their own flawed ideas are superior. This leads to disastrous decisions, toxic work environments, and a culture where the loudest voice, not the wisest one, often wins. We are building systems that increasingly reward the illusion of competence, while true expertise, which is often quiet, cautious, and humble, gets sidelined. We are creating a global society where the Dunning-Kruger effect is not just a personal blind spot, but a collective, systemic crisis. So if we are all wired for this, and our world actively encourages it, how do we escape? How do you break a cycle when the first condition of being in the cycle is that you can't see it? This is the great paradox of the Dunning-Kruger effect. It creates a circular problem. To know you're incompetent, you need to have the competence you lack. It feels like an unbreakable prison. But there is a key. It is not more intelligence. It is not more information. It is something far more profound. Intellectual humility. The ultimate antidote to the Dunning-Kruger effect was articulated over 2,000 years ago. The philosopher Socrates, considered one of the wisest men in ancient Athens, famously concluded, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." This wasn't a clever turn of phrase, it was the very foundation of his philosophy. His wisdom didn't come from having all the answers. It came from being relentlessly aware of the limits of his own knowledge. He understood that the moment you think you are an expert, the moment you become certain, is the moment you stop learning. True intelligence isn't about being right. It's about having the desire to find out when you're wrong. So how do we cultivate this Socratic wisdom in our daily lives? It requires a conscious and ongoing effort to fight against our own nature. It begins with the courage to actively seek out disagreement and feedback. Instead of surrounding yourself with people who confirm your beliefs, you must find people who will challenge them. When someone criticizes your work or your ideas, your first instinct is to become defensive. You must train yourself to override that instinct, and instead ask, what can I learn from this? Assume the person giving you feedback might see something you don't. Next, you must commit to being a lifelong learner. The more you genuinely learn about a subject, the more you will naturally begin to appreciate its complexity. This is what forces you down from the peak of Mount Stupid. Pick a subject you think you know well, and then decide to take an advanced course in it, or read a dense academic book about it. You will quickly discover the vast ocean of knowledge you were previously unaware of. This process naturally cultivates humility and tempers overconfidence. Most importantly, you must learn to question your own certainty. Make it a habit. When you feel that powerful, satisfying feeling of being 100% right about something, let that feeling be a red flag. Take it as a signal to pause and actively search for the best arguments against your own position. This practice, known as intellectual friction, is like a workout for your critical thinking. It forces you to engage with opposing views not as enemies to be defeated, but as opportunities to test and refine your own understanding. And finally, learn to embrace the 3 most powerful words in the pursuit of knowledge: I don't know. In a world that rewards confident ignorance, admitting the gaps in your knowledge is a radical act of intellectual honesty. It is not a sign of weakness. It is the hallmark of a truly intelligent and secure mind. In the end, this journey is not about discovering that you are an idiot. It is about recognizing that we are all, in some area or another, gloriously, universally, and fundamentally ignorant. And that is not a curse. It is a gift. The terrifying trap isn't being wrong. It's being locked in the prison of thinking you are always right. The liberation comes when you accept your own fallibility. It frees you from the exhausting burden of having to perform expertise, of having to defend your ego at all costs. It opens you up to the joy of discovery, the thrill of changing your mind, and the deep, authentic connection that comes from learning alongside others. Admitting you might be the fool in the room is the first, essential step toward becoming the wise person. The Dunning-Kruger effect teaches us a humbling truth. Our mind's greatest enemy is often itself. Our certainty is a cage, and our ignorance of that ignorance is the lock. But the key is in your hands. It is the willingness to question, the courage to be wrong, and the humility to learn. So I will leave you with this challenge. Think of one belief you hold with absolute certainty. One area where you feel completely confident in your expertise. Now, this week, spend 30 minutes actively researching the smartest arguments against it. Don't do it to change your mind. Do it to see if your belief can withstand the pressure. Because choosing to confront your own potential for foolishness is the only way to begin the lifelong journey toward true wisdom. It is the moment you stop defending what you think you know and start discovering what is actually true. See you next time.